Evening, everybody, to this evening's Advice Line live event. I'm really sorry we've been having a couple of technical difficulties behind the scenes, but we do believe we're now live. Thank goodness for that. So as I was saying in our previous kind of short live streamers, my name's Sophia. I'm the Community Advice Services Manager here at Scottish Autism, and I'm joined by the fabulous Fee and Caitlin, both of whom are community advisors, but I'll let them do introductions shortly. This evening, obviously, our Advice Line live event is on inclusion and access in the community, which is quite a big topic in itself. But I guess what I want to ask everybody is, should you have any questions that you would like to ask us this evening, please pop them in the comments below. I will be able to see any comments or questions that you raise. But I guess also I'd like to start a bit of a discussion as well. And this is an kind of open opportunity for everybody to, start a discussion is, what is inclusion and what does access in the community look like to you, whether you're a parent, carer, whether you're an autistic person, or whether you're a professional who supports families or autistic people directly. What do these terms mean to you? What comes to mind? And like I say, if you've got any questions, please just drop them in the comments below. Caitlin, I'm wondering whether you would be comfortable just kind of introducing yourself, but also, I guess, starting to share with us what you feel inclusion and access in the community means to you.
Yeah, no problem. So I'm Caitlin. I'm a community advisor on our Advice Line team here at Scottish Autism, and I'm also an autistic person myself. And inclusion to me is wholly just being respected for who you are and accessing spaces, whether that be socially, within work, within education, without barriers and with your access needs being met and valued as well. I think that's the important part. It's not just about ticking boxes, it's about valuing the need for those access requirements, whatever they may be for that individual. And I don't know if you want to say your piece around inclusion as well.
Yeah, thank you, Caitlin. So yeah, I'm Fee Bailey and I'm at Dundee Connections, also an autistic individual. And I think yeah, value is the word that kind of stands out. I think for me it's something about choice, and something about participation. And I think when you have a more diverse kind of offering on ways of participating, that's what really invites people in, not just into the room, but into the space, whatever, wherever it is, to be able to kind of, yeah, to participate in that. So something about choice and participation for me.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you both have kind of hit some key things for me in terms of the value, the choice, and the participation. And I guess I'm going to ask I'm going to pick up on the kind of participation element. And I guess from yourselves as community advisors, obviously we provide advice, support, and guidance. As well as signposting, but we also deliver various kind of group spaces in different settings. And I guess what can participation look like? And I guess it can vary across different people and the different people that we support. But I guess what can participation look like? Because I guess for many it might look different. Caitlin, I'm wondering whether you could just kind of touch upon what participation might look like for some people.
I think it's very much, respecting individual ways of showing participation. So I think lots of people maybe expect participation to be very vocal, very involved, but actually for a lot of people, just getting to that space, whatever that space may be, and sitting in that space, whether it's for 5 minutes or the whole expected time or dipping in and out, that's participation actually. Just even considering going to a space, reaching out, having a conversation with a provider of a social space or with a workplace or an education course that you want to take part in, even having those conversations and taking those small steps towards it, whatever part of that participation you're on, it's that journey that you're on, I think, is the most important part of participation. Actually, we're not reaching a specific destination, we're not on a specific timeline to reach these goals of participation. It looks different for everyone, and every individual has their own, goals and timeframes within that. And I think it's about how do we support around those individuals to get to where they want to be.
Mm-hmm. Mhm.
Mm.
And I guess when you're speaking, it makes me think about some of the support that we deliver at Dundee Connections V in terms of the kind of different kind of ways in which we might support participation as well. And I guess as Caitlin's kind of quite rightly highlighted, it could be that vocal participation, or it could be attending a space for a short period of time, or being within that space and I guess just soaking up what is kind of going on within that space. And I guess from your perspective, Fee, is there anything you would add in terms of that kind of participation element for people?
Yeah, that really got me thinking when Caitlin was talking there about some of the feedback that we get. So I think we talked like we did at the start about voice and choice, but it's not necessarily about speaking. There's so many different ways of participating and having your voice in the room, whether you're writing things down, whether you come and you listen for 3 months and then you want to maybe speak and ask a question. But what Caitlin was saying about just getting into the space, that's what people seem to really appreciate, is that we kind of follow the sort of ebb and flow of people's lives, which can be quite chaotic at times, and it's not always predictable. So actually, you could dip out of the space for 3 months and come back and still feel included and feel like you're not having to start again. And I think that can be one of the biggest barriers. I think Caitlin would agree with that, where if you dip out of a space, you may have kind of got in there, felt like you've been included and you've really warmed up and you've maybe made friends, and then you dip away for whatever reason, and actually going back is really, really hard, almost as hard as it is in the first place. So I think that's the feedback we've got. I know at Dundee Connections is this feels like a much easier space to come back into than some other spaces, which is maybe one of its sort of successes in the way that it's been set up,
And
because we know
supporting
that
that
that's a barrier. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
hmm
and supporting that participation and that voice and choice, and I guess different ways in remaining contact as well, which might help, I
Yeah.
guess, that
That's true.
return as well. Yeah, I'm
Mm.
just thinking more broadly in terms of what Dundee Connections offers. Um, we're starting to get a couple of kind of comments in, some kind of possibly questions as well. Um, and I think there's an interesting point here. You know, we've spoken about participation, we've spoken about voice choice, and I guess the theme this evening is about accessing the community. And I guess one of the comments is in relation to one of our other community hubs, which is a bit like Dundee Connections, but that's our one-stop shop in Fife. And I guess them commenting that actually they've always wanted to make that step to going to those opportunities at the one-stop shop, but also ultimately travel is a barrier in terms of that. And I guess travel, whether that be because of the rurality of Fife. Fife is quite a kind of big, rural expanse in certain areas, which can cause those difficulties in terms of travel. But I guess travel, I'm just thinking as well more broadly, can bring additional barriers for the kind of community that we're thinking about this evening. And I guess, Caitlin, again, I'm going to throw it to you in terms of what what can be done to support, if there's additional barriers to that travel element. And I'm not saying that for this person here that's made the comment, it could just be that rurality element, but what I guess can be the barriers around travel to actually accessing the community.
Yeah, I think it's so valid in terms of, there's a wide variety of individuals that may want to access our spaces, and it might not only be that they're autistic, they might have other conditions that we have to take into account, or they may be a parent that has their own access needs separate to autism, and it's actually how do we make spaces more accessible? We do have online offerings that we can kind of work with you on, so we can do virtual meetings, and we can talk to you over the phone, but our social spaces and our groups, we have online offerings. Even the ones at Fife, we've got online peer support as well. But in terms of that travel element, I think it's what can we do to make our spaces better? We want to hear your feedback. We want to know where you are. Can we do outreach in your area? Can we do drop-ins in your area? Is that something that we need to consider? And we do have things like that throughout our offerings in the Fife area through our one-stop shop. So it's good to hear those other additional areas that we may need to consider reaching people and coming to you when we can.
Yeah. And the person that kind of raised this question is said agreed. I'm disabled too. And I guess, what I would also say is, how can we, as you've said quite rightly, Caitlin, how can we improve that accessibility to our services? And I guess in terms of the one-stop shop, that is something that the team have been actively looking at over the last kind of at least 6 months. in terms of that transport element, because I guess we do recognise that actually transport can be a barrier for people within Fife. So for example, they have set up social drop-ins for people to come together in more local areas, and at the moment they're in Dunfermline and Cooper, where people can come together and I guess get access elements of peer support, but also I guess one-to-one advice and guidance should they want to. And I guess I'm going to say Mandy, and I know I haven't used your name up until now. I guess what I would say is please reach out to us. Please let us know, where our gaps are potentially are in services and what additional things we should be looking at in terms of supporting that access to the community. We're getting quite a few comments in, and I know we did have a few pre-submitted questions, but I guess one of our pre-submitted questions is potentially along kind of some of the similar lines that has been mentioned by Dawn. So one of our questions was around school, and I guess supporting to some extent transitions around school because communities change during that time, but also support can, I guess, change, evolve, and vary during that time as well. And I guess Dawn's mentioned that obviously her son is in high school, feels quite unsupported, and doesn't necessarily feel as such kind of included within the school and that community. And I guess based on the pre-submitted question and some of that context there, I guess what are the kind of things that we thought about in relation to education and that kind of evolving community and inclusion element? Caitlin.
Yeah. So I think it's about, again, I'm always for individuals to have their own voice and choice. So it's about individually, how can we look at that? And we can do that more broadly. I've got you contacted at Viceline. We can do a bit more of that problem solving and strategy based stuff with you as an individual. But generally it's about supporting those transitions when you can. And I think that's the key, is if that doesn't go well for a young person, it can really snowball into that barrier for them that actually they've not felt supported in the first place, which is always harder to rebuild than initially getting it right. And a lot of that does come down to planning and preparation that not always is on offer right away. You have to ask for these things. So we have quite a comprehensive guide on our website to transitions in school, all the way from nursery to leaving school into adulthood, that is really good to explore wherever you are on that path. But for this individual, we're speaking about high school and that barrier to just go into school, and actually what can be done in the meantime to support that young person to just access other parts of the community, if it's not actually that overnight they're going to go back to school, because that's very unlikely at that stage. It's the baby steps that get us towards an end goal, whatever that end goal looks like. And it might be getting back to school, or it might be, are they at the stage where we're looking at other opportunities that we can work towards, rather than that, again, timeline that is expected of young people and anyone in life. And actually we have to look more individually and holistically at an individual and that support to put around them to get it right.
Bea, I guess, in terms of your perspective and I guess kind of the high school environment and the transition into high school, but also where there's that element of no support. And I'm just reading Dawn's comment more in terms of it's to the point where the son's not really attending school and missed prelims, and I guess it's that natural kind of perceived trajectory for young people. I guess what are your additional thoughts around that, even just from a kind of Dundee connections perspective, in terms of adults that we support that may not have kind of taken, I guess, what I would call that trajectory?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we meet quite a lot of people, sort of 16, 17, 18-year-olds that have maybe missed a big chunk of kind of the social side of school, or they've not done things in the right order. And I think that's maybe something that people can be a little bit reassured around, is like there is time sometimes to do these things. There's so much pressure to follow, like Caitlin was describing, this kind of journey. There's this mainstream journey that fits very few people. So actually, sometimes there are opportunities to kind of for growth and then to take in some rest and then coming back in later. And sometimes it's like Caitlin was saying, small steps. And I was thinking how sometimes we're chatting to people and they found just following up on an interest and one other child that shares that interest, reaching out to the school and just something like that that's really small, even if it's a club outside of school or it's something, just adds that one connection, even if it's one more person who's on your gaming platform, who's just one extra kind of familiar face. Even if you don't speak to them throughout the school day, that can sometimes just create a little bit of connection for people. But I don't know whether there's some reassurance there that like there is time. And I think I've been struck by that in Dundee, that we see a lot of people starting at the college or the two main universities, and they haven't followed that straight line. They're coming in maybe a little bit later, maybe a year or two later, or they're changing courses because they've suddenly found their passion in their early 20s, and realize that actually they are playing to their strengths now, and they just weren't able to quite do that at school. But I think what really shows is the families who've been able to create like a safe space for people to come back to after what's a difficult school day, and how that really pays off as an adult when it comes to kind of being able to regulate more easily. So I guess that's from the Dundee side what I've seen
Yeah.
happening. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm just reading some of the comment. There's, Dawn's kind of adding a bit more as we go in terms of comments. And I guess, interestingly enough, it sounds like Dawn's been part of one of our parent groups over time that we've gone and delivered within school settings by the sounds of it. It was 6 weeks and it was amazing, which is great to hear. And I guess it is something that we do to go and support parents over those 6 weeks, those 6 sessions. But I guess it's at the point now where I guess as a mum wondering what happens if he's unable to sit nat fives, what are the options then? And I guess from our perspective, I guess, Dawn, I would encourage you to reach out to our advice line for us to kind of get a bit more context in terms of, the situation that is there at the moment for your son and how we can support that. And I guess start to look at what options might be available to your son at this moment in time. Fee's touched upon interests and supporting interests, and how can those interests almost be interwoven through education to support and build that relationship and trust. And I guess, Dawn, it's unfortunate you feel that, in terms of options, they're not currently really being communicated with you. So I guess, yeah, what I would do is encourage you to get in touch with the advice line. And again, Dawn, it's great that you've been part of our Get Set for Autism program with Caitlin. So yeah, it sounds like obviously you're at a juncture just now, and yes, it's been great the support that you've had to date, but things have changed. And I think it's probably worth just getting in touch with us to see how we can kind of give you a bit more personalized advice, support, and guidance in terms of, I guess, next steps for your son. And like I say, it sounds like you're on a bit of a juncture. But I guess, Caitlin, Fee, I think some of the points that you've raised are probably helpful kind of, I guess, starting points in relation to some of the things that you can think about. I'm just looking at some of the other comments coming through, and I'm slowly losing track as what I'm going to say. And again, we're just getting comments from people with really positive comments in terms of just the services that they've accessed through Scottish Autism, which is lovely to read. Another individual saying that they've participated in the Whole Family Flourish program at the One Stop Shop, which is very much about supporting parents and carers, but also young people. And supporting around the element of reducing stress and building connections. So looking at that wider kind of community and how we build connections, not just within the family, but more broadly. So it's great to hear some positive feedback again in terms of that program. I guess what we'll do is we'll take a bit of a detour onto, I guess, another pre-submitted question. And I guess one of the questions was around how do you go about supporting inclusive environments? And what are the things that you can think about in kind of, I guess, developing inclusive environments? And Fee, I'm gonna kind of come to you on this one first and foremost in terms of inclusive environments, and I guess, your experiences in terms of what has worked and what can be supportive in terms of creating that inclusive environment.
Yeah, I guess there's sort of two big bits of learning for me with these sorts of spaces. At Dundee Connections, it's connecting people to existing spaces, social spaces, other types of peer support. How can these people get through the door and into the room, as we've sort of mentioned before? And sometimes I think you can ask quite a lot if people openly identify as being neurotypical to accommodate some of those needs for an individual. So sometimes you can come at it that way. And I think one of the challenges, but that we've really welcomed at Dundee Connections, is creating a completely autistic only space. Actually, there's a lot there with lots and lots of different needs. So there's something about really supporting the space before and after. So working around sort of physically with sort of time, allowing a lot of time before arriving to places. And I think there's a lot about expectations and kind of hidden agendas. So I think that because that's all kind of out in the open in a peer support space, it's a bit more straightforward, but we can sometimes then help someone connect to an existing space and say, it says that your group's really like this, but what is it like really? And yeah, you can do a little bit of research and a bit of digging around. And sometimes it allows them to even look at things like, what's our journey like? What kind of buses do people have to get? If people need to get 2 buses quite commonly to reach us here, then how stressed are they going to be when they arrive? Are they going to want a drink? It's things like that. So yeah, I think there's something about almost like going on that journey that each person's going to be going on and testing it out. And just thinking of what those kind of physical barriers are, and then uncovering some of the sort of hidden expectations and getting those out in the open for people.
Yep. Yeah, no, and I guess you were saying it's that kind of pre kind of support in terms of that, and that's, I guess, what you've just described there is how you would break that down and what that would look like for somebody. And I guess Caitlin, obviously you've very much kind of been involved as well in kind of, providing inclusive spaces, whether that be in person or online. And I guess, is there anything you would add to that in terms of what Fee's said?
Yeah, I think the key thing is the planning and the expectations, as Fee's brought into the conversation there. But I think as much as we can offer in terms of what to expect, I think is the key. Can we take images of the space if it's an in-person space? Can we do a walkthrough? Can we have a bit of a video show round of what to expect from the space? Actually meet the facilitators. Can you meet the facilitators beforehand? Build up that rapport and that trust with who will be leading the space, I think is really important. And like Fee said, if it's an autistic led space, it's being clear about that and our communication that actually the facilitators are also peers in that sense as well. And I think it's really important to keep those safe spaces and not to verge from what the expectation is. And I think if there is any changes to spaces for whatever reason, it's been led by the voices in the room, not anything else. It's been led by the feedback from the people who do participate or the people who want to participate as well. I think it's not always just about who we're reaching, it's who we're also failing to reach, and how do we work together as facilitators and people who do attend to reach more people and include more people in these spaces that are so helpful. And like Fee also touched upon, it's been aware of the impact of attending these spaces, although they're positive spaces and we get a lot of positive things from attending. Actually, we are given our energy to be there, and it does take a lot out of someone. So like he's saying, having those times before and after the planned activity for a group, whether it's a discussion space or a more creative space, or there's a goal to a space, I think it's planning in as part of the spaces. Actually, we have a transitional period for you arriving and a transitional period for you leaving the space as well, rather than that just ending and just beginning. I think that's really difficult for some people to arrive at a group and it suddenly starts and then it suddenly ends. And actually, we need to warm up and cool down like we would for maybe an exercise class, but we need to do that for any spaces. And I think that is helpful for whoever attends. I think a lot of the things we can do to help make a space inclusive, it helps everyone. That's the whole point of inclusivity, is actually everyone will benefit from these adjustments in some way, and the people who really need them will benefit hugely. And it's the impact that will have on their life is amazing, and that's the feedback that we get from people actually when we reach out for that.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to the initial comment around voice. and just recognizing that it's not those that you may kind of communicate verbally. And I guess it's thinking about, how do we capture voices in different ways and be creative in that, but also recognizing people's preferred communication methods as well. So some people may wish to write down kind of their feedback or share their views in terms of what would make space more inclusive or more accessible. Whereas some individuals may use pictures and may kind of sign in relation to that feedback. So I guess it's being mindful of those different communication methods. And I think, you also spoke there quite heavily in terms of, I guess, the kind of different things around kind of, I guess, giving yourself time in respect to cooling down, warming up a bit like exercise. And I guess it got me thinking about, I guess, some of the kind of support that we offer around energy accounting and balancing our energy in some respects. And Fee, I don't know whether you've got any thoughts around sharing kind of what we mean by energy accounting and how that can support.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of rather than measuring things in time, almost an event that you have to go to thinking about it in terms of how much energy that you're going to need, which I think is quite popular at the moment. But yeah, do you need to prepare a lot before you go into the space, or is it that actually you go in usually quite warmed up, you really enjoy it, and even though you've loved it to bits, you still come away and need maybe half a day, so you have to score out half a day the following day because you're coming to a social event the evening before. So I think it's even the things that we enjoy and love and are maybe like really fitted to our strengths that we can still need recovery time from. So it's probably, yeah, around that when it comes to energy.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess it's that as what Caitlin referred to it slightly differently in terms of the warming up and cooling down, but it's making sure that you kind of reserve that energy for that space that you're going to attend. We've still got a few more kind of comments kind of coming in, and I guess I'm reading one of them, and I think it slightly links to one of the pre-submitted kind of questions that we had around kind of, I guess, obviously sometimes in terms of accessing spaces, it can for some individuals cause an element of distress. And I guess how can distress be supported? And I guess the specific question that's kind of come in is how do you support about negative coping mechanisms to cope in a neurotypical world? And I guess, what we may class as negative coping mechanisms may kind of, again, vary in terms of how we might perceive those. But I guess, yeah, what are your thoughts coming to mind when I'm kind of talking about those elements in terms of negative coping mechanisms to cope with a neurotypical world? How can we support that? What support is there in relation to that, Caitlin?
I think, like you're saying, negative, it can vary what that means. And I think, who is it negatively affecting as well as the question? Is it negatively affecting others around you, or is it negatively affecting yourself? And I would approach both of those differently, because is it actually the thing that's negatively impacting other people? Is that actually a regulatory thing and you actually need that to be in the space? So we hear lots in a school environment that, children that are noisy or not making eye contact or not listening, when actually is that perceived as negative in that environment, when actually is it that they need a more supportive regulation tool in that space to be in that space and access that classroom environment or the workplace environment for older people? Or is it something that is harmful that we would need to do a bit more work around? Actually, how do we support that person to find a more healthy coping strategy in that environment, in that space? And actually, what I always go to when there's these negative coping strategies is, what is the individual communicating to us? What do they need in that moment? Why is the distress so heightened, and how do we support around that and reducing that heightened level of distress? And actually, it is about that individualized approach again. So for that individual comment, and it would be really good to speak to you via advice line or one of our hubs if you're local to one of them, and we can actually do a bit of work around what specifically is this coping strategy, what's the negative aspect of it, and how can we support that level of distress to be lowered for that individual in that specific instance.
Fee, would you add anything to that?
it's all there, isn't it? I think it's just, yeah, reducing the stress. Maybe you might not need this coping mechanism, but where's the judgment come from that it's negative? Who's told you that? I wonder what it is. And I'm just thinking, yeah, people can come to, say, peer support feeling as though they've been to other sort of supportive groups, and there's things that have been disruptive, and perhaps actually giving people space to speak in a different way, participate in a different way, get up and walk around the room, get up and take their shoes off, whatever it is that they're needing to do, and then actually they're able to settle into the space, and that's all that they needed. But resisting doing that because it felt wrong, they've perhaps, they've had to sort of leave the room because it's just felt they haven't felt be able to be like included in it. So I think, it's always worth exploring what is that, because it's probably got a root to it, like from the classroom or from somebody who's kind of made a judgment. So yeah. And being creative, I think you said earlier. So I think that's it, isn't it? You can quite often, once you look at these things, you can find a creative way of somehow including it and accommodating it.
Yeah. And I think quite rightly, obviously, I think that's something kind of, I guess, quite personal to this individual. And I guess looking at how we can best support and advise in terms of that specific question. Because, as you say, who is it that's perceiving it as negative? Is it, and actually why in relation to that. So I guess what I would say is, having kind of read some of your previous comments, you're obviously through in Fife. Obviously, the one-stop shop is there to offer advice, support, and guidance. And I guess one comment that has come in following from Mandy is, Fee, you're spot on. Is in terms of what you said there, in terms of that the negative coping mechanisms. In terms of that. I guess I'm very aware of the time, and I know we did start a bit later. The questions are still coming in. I guess what I might do is just ask one more question in terms of what's coming through. But I guess if I haven't managed to answer any of your questions, or if I've missed anything, then I guess what we'll do is, if you get in touch with us with your contact details, we'll kind of get in touch with you directly following the event this evening. Obviously not tonight, but at some point later this week. I guess one final question, and I guess it's those, but we're on the topic of coping mechanisms, and some of the difficulties that people can kind of, I guess, maybe experience in different environments. And I guess we kind of touched upon this, Caitlin, slightly in kind of the answer that you mentioned, but I guess somebody's mentioned that, in terms of accommodations within education, actually for some individuals they might want to wear a hat, or not necessarily answer in front of the class. So I guess how do you navigate those situations in some circumstances?
I think the problem solving aspect of this would be that the teachers are all aware, but in practicality they're not checking things like plans every day of the week that you may have set out with the school. So is it that your young person may need a different way of communicating that in that moment? Do they need a bit of a in-school communication passport that they can use, rather than having the challenge of speaking up in that moment for themselves? Because I think there's a lot of pressure put on young people, and especially secondary education, to self-advocate and be independent. And it's that, like we said previously, there's that invisible timeline of when a young person should be independent and when they should be able to speak up for themselves. And with neurodivergent young people who are particularly struggling in that education environment, they're feeling unsafe, they're not feeling supported, so there will be inevitably masking and feeling heightened in terms of their distress levels. So those, regular communication aspects that then maybe other young people could have, where they could advocate for the fact that they've got, a different uniform agreement with their school, when actually your young person might need a different way of communicating that to teachers, whether it's on some flashcards that they can show, or if they have a lanyard round that they can wear if they're comfortable with that, or is it actually the teachers need a bit of a communication passport that they have on their system that they need to be checking more regularly for your young person, so that they're not being questioned or pulled up on a dress code situation, when it's actually helping them be in that space and it's a comfort for them and a regulatory thing for them to wear a hat. It's simple, it seems, but there's that barrier of having a dress code that's huge for some people in terms of, feeling comfortable in what they're wearing in that space. That can make or break if they can access education just from a uniform.
Yep. Yep. And I think, you touched upon there that, it should be straightforward, but
Mhm.
it's not. It's quite complex, um, in terms of just, I guess, kind of getting needs kind of, I guess, across to those in which are part of that environment. And I don't think it's just an education setting. Sometimes it can be within employment settings. And I think we've touched upon that really early on in some of the conversations that we've had today. I guess that, like I said, is going to be the last kind of question for this evening. And it does seem to have opened up a bit of a conversation around kind of uniform and clothes and the difficulties that I guess that can present for people in terms of accessing school. But I guess anyone that's watching, if you've got any kind of questions that you feel have been unanswered, or you've not felt that you've wanted to comment on this evening, but feel that you do want to touch base with ourselves, please feel free to get in touch with our advice line, which is open Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday from 10 till 4. You can phone, email, and live chat, and our marketing team will put the details underneath. I am very aware that we've had a few people kind of watching this evening who are also part of our local community hubs, our one-stop shop in Fife, and potentially some people watching from Connections. So I guess what I would say is our marketing team will also put the details of those community hubs in there as well, in terms of that local support for people too. And I guess what I would say as well as before I finish up this evening is it's actually been quite nice to see the community that's formed under the comments this evening in terms of people supporting one another, um, and giving each other some guidance or advice, or even just sharing similar experiences where actually it can support people to not feel so isolated and alone, and feeling like they're the only ones experiencing some of the things that we've spoken about this evening. Um, so yeah, I hope everyone's enjoyed listening into the conversation this evening. Fee, Caitlin, thank you so much for joining me this evening. And again, everybody, apologies for, I guess, the technical difficulties that we did have starting off this evening. And I guess our next Advice Line Live event will be in March, led by Caitlin. So good night, everyone. Enjoy your evenings.